Okay, we're back with our 11th socially distant studio visit, which is a misnomer of sorts because they're more of a pandemic diary where we're checking in with different artists that have exhibited at Hallwalls over the years, see how they're doing right now, what they're doing, how things are, where they are. And today we're speaking with Joan Linder in Buffalo, New York. Joan's probably about a mile away from me, literally, although it feels much, much farther. My first question, Joan, as with everyone, is how are you? How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing pretty well. You know, healthy, which is great,
Well,
and
yeah, you have two kids. Family is good.
everybody's good. Yeah, so
Yeah,
we're really lucky in that way. Absolutely healthy
uh,
and extremely busy.
extremely busy. That's good.
Yeah.
Well, which might bring me to my next question. I haven't asked everybody this because some artists can't get to their studios. Some people are, yeah, not necessarily working on something at this moment. But you're always drawing, it seems. And if
Trying.
I wonder what you're drawing right now.
Well, I'm kind of working on two things, and then everything is very slow, sort of chipping away because I kept thinking, in some ways, being shut in for me, like this kind of situation, would normally be perfect, like a residency or something like that, and I don't need a lot of space to do things usually. But in this situation, the combination of homeschooling and having a full-time job makes the actual drawing part a little more difficult. Um, so one of the things I'm working at is I'm chipping away at a commission which is currently on pause for public art for public schools in New York City for a school out in Brooklyn. So I'm working on drawings for that, which is largely based on plants and animals. And I'm waiting for the weather to really break so that I can go outside. But the big thing that I'm working on is trying, to adjust to the new world of Zoom, and online everything. So I keep a sketchbook, and it's now filled with things like Zoom drawings, and most of them are not very good, but not that you asked to see them, but
Oh, I want to see them.
FaceTime, Zoom, Zoom meetings, Zoom parties, So just trying to the only time where I'm sitting and can really, sit and sketch for a while does seem to be that when I'm in front of the screen and not reading and typing.
Well, when someone else is talking, what else are you going to do? You're
It
going to listen
definitely,
to them, but you might as well draw them.
yeah, well, for the past 3 years since I've been working in administration at the university, I've been drawing the meetings as much as possible when I sit in them, and it definitely helps me focus. So it's a pretty natural translation to the flat screen.
Now, you mentioned the university. I wanted to ask you something about that because you're a professor and a chair at the University of Buffalo Art Department. And I wanted to ask, because about a week or so before the coronavirus really hit, and UB was one of the schools that seemed to shut down, make a decision very quickly about shutting down. But about a week or so prior to that, I recall was when I got an email outlining all of the MFA shows and their dates and where they were happening. And I wanted to ask you, how has that been dealt with the students and their MFA projects that were all looming and now are not happening in a certain sort of way?
In a conventional kind of way. Yeah, well, we're working on that. There's two things. I mean, probably the easiest one for me to mention is the undergraduate senior thesis show, which Becky Brown is teaching that class. That has paired with our web design class, so that my understanding right now is that the web design students are building a site for each thesis project. And then we're working on a physical publication, which we'll be sending out in the near future. So that's what we're doing. I mean, we definitely have the hopes that in the fall, you know, if things are back to some kind of physical normal, that we'll be able to mount exhibitions. And then the graduate students are working on their own. Each one of them is working on their own way of handling the virtual situation, you know, so presenting their work in that form. Eric Drazen just did a show that had an interactive space and actually had an opening you could go into with your avatar to see a simulated exhibition.
I mean, the advantage for you as professors is that you've already been following students closely with their work, so you can at least evaluate them at this point, even if there isn't a brick and mortar show.
Mm-hmm. And people are working, you know, as best they can to modify their work. You know, most of the students really are still working hard and thinking about how to bring it together and working on written and working on different kinds of documentation. So
Do
that
you have any
things,
sense yet what the school is going to do in the fall? Or is that
I have as much sense as anybody does just by listening to Cuomo.
right? Right. Speaking of brick and mortar shows, I noted on Facebook when Nina Freudenheim passed that your show at Nina Freudenheim, which is, I presume, still hanging, although unviewable, was kind of like the last opening that most of us went to before this all came crashing down, which is sort of a bittersweet thing because it was a nice opening. It was you know, in that modest space when you get people in there, they're chatty and they're convivial, and it was a great show. And so it's kind of strange thinking back that that was the last opening we all went to. And in the interim, Nina has passed away, and I wondered if you had any thoughts you wanted to share about working with her, because you've shown with her more than once, I think, right?
Yeah, it was my second solo show. I mean, I just feel really, really lucky to have had the opportunity to work with her. Um, I, when I first went into her space, I was just so enamored by it. I remember going to an opening and being like, "Whoa, who is this person?" And this space was so beautiful, and the scene was so lively. And then the more that I learned about her program and her, I was just, you know, I think she was in such a pedestal in my mind of the kind of gallerist that I would love to work with. And, you know, when she approached me, and I think it was like, that's about 5 years ago, like some, maybe 2013, 2014, to do an exhibition, I felt, I like, wow, of all the places to show in Buffalo, of any gallerist, she was exactly the person that I felt like would be great to show with. And she gave terrific studio visits, and we became pretty friendly. You know, you go over to the gallery and sit in the back room and chat with her about art and artists. Like, it was just, she knew more than so, not even just so, she knew so much about art and the art world. And she was just always so curious and generous and fun to talk to. So I just really wanted to do an exhibition, a second exhibition, and she'd been asking me for a few years, and we decided to do this show in April. I kept pushing it off because of my work at UB, but yeah, I'm really glad that it happened. I mean, it was very much a show in my mind. I was thinking about titling it "April is the Cruelest Month."
Oh, boy. Wow.
That was my other, and then I settled on Brood because that just, I don't know, Brood kind of falls in line a little better with how I've been titling things for a while. But it was very much about, I think, springtime, but springtime more as ends of things. You know, I was thinking a lot about like menopause and loss of fertility, and almost all the egg cartons are empty, you know, and tissue boxes and allergies and stuffy noses and crying, you know, sickness. And then there's a component of the show that's about airplane seats and just these kind of confined spaces in flight being so much like egg cartons anyways. So
And
anyways, I was really happy to be able to put the exhibition up, but I knew that she was well when we were hanging the show, and that was really sad. And then,
I was thinking about it just after she passed away, that she'd been a gallerist for 45 years in Buffalo, and I can't remember anyone, and this is unusual, ever saying anything bad about her.
because she was just so, in my mind, like curious and generous. Like those are the two words. And I mean, some people say like classy and elegant and thoughtful, but I mean, I had no idea what she was like until I started talking to her more and working with her. And I was so intimidated. Like, who is this, like this woman with such stature and, such sort of command over the art scene in Buffalo, and knew half of the teachers that I studied with in New York, and they all knew who she was. But then, yeah, the conversations that I had with her were always just so generous and so curious. And the other thing, then this was really personal, was she was so encouraging of my being a parent, which I think that's not always something that people are encouraging of, professionally speaking. So that half the conversation could be about art and half of it could be about children.
What was the installation process like with her? Did you lay it out with her together, or?
For this exhibition?
Yeah.
No, she was not so well. So the exhibition, Peter Stevens and I hung the show. The last time that I saw Nina was the week before the opening. And, it's my understanding that one of the last things she did was send out the invitations the following day. So I think the installation, I feel really good about it. I think probably would have looked different if we had worked on it together in different circumstances.
Oh, it looked beautiful. I thought it looked like a great show. I mean,
thanks, John.
That space was a funny space because it was one of the smaller spaces in Buffalo, but things always look pretty sharp in there. And, there are good sight lines in that gallery.
Amazing sight lines.
And nice little pockets of spaces that you can inhabit to look at work. So I always enjoyed that space a lot, even though it was so small.
It's funny. I was thinking also about how her space now is so much like all of like the new blue chip galleries on the Upper East Side, almost like a little ahead of her curve in that sense. But the gallery holds an enormous amount of work. I have 50 or 60. There's an enormous amount of drawings in the show, potentially overhung, but
yeah.
But also the way the space unfolds, it's true. Everything's like a little nook. So. But I think it's like, personally, it's, it's a loss. It's to not have that kind of support and encouragement. But for the Buffalo community, I think it's just, the art community, it's just huge.
It is huge. It's a hole no one can fill, really.
Yeah.
How are you finding, and I have my own perspective on it, but how are you finding social distancing in Buffalo, going to the grocery store, things like that?
Well, see, so I'm actually pretty good to just chill in my house. I noticed that it's really, I mostly just take walks in the neighborhood with the dog and do as minimal shopping as possible. But I think it's maybe starting to get to me a little bit. But I'm a little less, I think outside of driving out of the city to take a hike in nature with the kids, I'm doing as little interacting, and maybe at this moment it's okay. Does that, I think I was on overload before this.
So you've kind of gone to the other extreme now.
Yeah, I was multiple soccer practices, music lessons, meetings, meeting with students, art events, feeding people. Yeah.
How are the kids holding up inside?
Wait a second. What's your thought on this social distancing in Buffalo?
Well, when I've asked people in other cities, I'm curious about it because, like I say to them, I'll go out tomorrow morning to the grocery store I usually go to the Tops in North Tonawanda because it's even in normal times there's nobody there.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't seem that different to me. It's not like we live in New York that where
Mm-hmm.
it's a very dense place and suddenly vacant. I don't. It doesn't feel all that different to me when I go out, except that a lot of the usual places that would be open are not open. But
Mm-hmm.
I can't look for thrift shop paintings. But um, I don't know. That's why I'm curious how people perceive it, because I'm like everybody else, staying home, wandering between the very few rooms in my apartment, and fending off cabin fever the best I
Mm-hmm.
can. I mean, how are your kids enduring being in the house so much?
I mean, we're really lucky. We have a Buffalo house, so there's a lot of space, and there's a yard, and there's a dog. And I mean, I think the dog is probably the most helpful part because she requires like 4 or 5 walks a day. And so,
Okay.
in the neighborhood we live in is really nice for walking. So in that sense, I don't feel like it's too bad. I think they would like to see their friends. Um, they have far too much screen time, which is largely school related, but everything, I feel like in general, everything is just too much screen time, but they're doing really well.
Speaking of screen time, this is another thing I was thinking of. I'm very curious about, especially with kids who are born into a world of screens
Mm-hmm.
and grow up. That's just part of their reality. Do you find that they are um, easily adaptable to the new or the temporary current circumstance of say schooling through a screen? I mean, are they uh, managing that okay?
I think we're all, we're managing it fine. I think they're super comfortable with the screen. I mean, I think, I mean, we were not a very screen heavy family before, and the schools are now this week handing out devices to all of the kids so everybody can have their own. So I think they're trying to kind of come up with a better structure. I think it's really challenging for that notion of a transition. I think it's both at the university and in the public schools is people are all know how to do it because we all know how to be on our screens, but I think there's a lot to be ironed out in terms of how content is delivered and how you keep people engaged. But, in some ways, I think there are some things that are easier for my kids and some things that are more challenging.
My
I'd say
last
the best one was yesterday. Lou was supposed to make some kind of wearable thing, and he and Paul made a web shooter, a Spider-Man web shooter out of a dental floss box, some grommets, a Bic pen.
Wow, that's
That's the
kind of
best.
impressive.
But I would say I think like the nightmare, not nightmare, but I mean I think the things that are so challenging about all of this are like the multitude of platforms and the overload of communications and the difficulty of even getting on sites. You know, like getting to the content is often more difficult than the content itself, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. Are you finding it that way? Like the multitude of communications and platforms and.
We have been doing our staff meetings on Zoom and committee meetings and things like that. I don't know, people share stuff on the screen. I mean, our content at Hallwalls is programs, which
Right.
we can't really do at the moment. They rely on people coming to us, to openings and to concerts,
Mm-hmm.
things like that. We'll be live streaming a concert tomorrow night, so that's something. But I'm not dealing with the same sort of bureaucratic structure that you're dealing with, say, with the university, which I'm sure must be challenging, because that's challenging enough in person. So it must be a little bit extra texture to have to do it electronically.
Well, I think like for me, maybe I think it also depends on the scope of what you're dealing with. Like it's more, so we have Zoom, we have WebEx, we have UB Learns, we have email, then I have, professional email accounts that are different. Then there's, maybe family Zooms and right. But then the kids are on like a multitude of platforms also. There's Schoology, there's Campus Portal, there's like, Pearson's, there's this, so it's like the level of communication. It's like if it was one thing like Zoom, okay, fine, an email. But it's like, YouTube videos, there's that, and then things don't download, and then that space where you're going for me from something that's supposed to be pleasurable and entertainment, and then something that like it can be seamless, right? It can just all be within the confines of the screen, which then you just start to think about, it's just sort of like what little synapses are going in my head. It's almost like, what's the point of the body? So I find myself at the end of the day, like, there's so much great content for pleasure, but I'm like, how, like going to concerts or readings or talk or like this, but I'm so kind of wiped out by all the other communications.
Yeah, it kind of, you get a little oversaturated with the use of the technology. Because
exactly, like just the medium, it's not the content. Yeah.
Well, my last question is the same as I ask everyone. Whenever whatever version of normal returns, what's the first thing you want to do? Large or small, minor or major?
Ooh. See, I haven't even gotten to thinking about that. My first thought was swimming, but then I think I can go swimming anyways when it gets warm enough, just not in a pool, which is fine. Good question, John. Maybe like see some friends, go out, have a drink,
That's sort of what everybody says, actually, or most people say. They want to
see my parents. I'd love to see my parents.
Well, one artist I talked to said that she just wanted to go into a store and browse. She missed that. But yeah, we all want to see each other.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where are your parents? Are they okay?
Yeah, they're good. But, it's this thought of like, how long will that be? They're outside of the city. So.
Well, listen, thank you so much for taking a few minutes today to talk. It's great to see you virtually, even though we're so close. And sorry we can't see each other in person. I hope to see you soon in person. I hope we figure out what's happening with our auction and I can come over and we can rifle through a drawer or something and talk about that. But thank you again. It's great to see you today.
Well, thanks for inviting me, John. It's nice to see you too.
All right.
All right. Okay, bye.